you think everybody goes through tribulation for Christ, persecution?
Everybody doesn't go through the same kind of persecution. There's different kinds. Some people have never gone through physical persecution, but they've gone through a lot of emotional persecution. I think the degree of what we have to go through, in terms of whether it's persecution, suffering, whatever category we might come up with, it has a great deal to do with our unique characteristics, history, situation. In other words, not everybody is going to go through the same kind of things to have certain things developed in them. There's some qualities that might be able to be developed in a person that doesn't take a lot of pressure for their personality. They have the type personality that is malleable in a positive sense. I mean, able to be easily formed by God in a certain area. There's areas of my personality where I have a tenderness that I didn't have to learn by getting beat on for a long time. It just was part of my personality. In that area, God could maybe bring more development in my life without a lot of external pressures and persecution. Whereas for somebody else that's not tender, they're hard, God may have to break that person before. So there is no one-size-fits-all process of persecution. So all of us have to end up getting stoned one day like Paul did. All of us have to die on a cross like Jesus did and like tradition says Peter potentially did. Not necessarily. There are different paths for each of us. And some people may not have to undergo the same kind of persecution as others because their spirit might be, again, I'll use this word, malleable, meaning it's easy to be shaped, malleable enough that God can do things in their life without having to take them through a brutal process to do that.
It's not time yet for that.
There's another aspect to it.
Well, you can see it. I mean, it's coming. But people in here, I don't believe, maybe the kids.
I would agree. I don't know that our oldest saints will endure that level of persecution, Brother Stevens, and you're our oldest saint, so you'd be among them.
I don't think I'll be here that long.
I'd love for you to be here that long, but on the other hand, I'd dread for you to be here that long. I don't want you to have to go through it. But there is one thing I know, because I've watched your character under a lot of different circumstances. I know how you handled the loss of your wife. I have never seen somebody respond in a more spiritual way than you did at the loss of your spouse. I don't mean you didn't suffer in sorrow. You did. But I have never seen anyone more spiritually mature in their response to the loss of their spouse than I saw you.
Well, the widow would get up and preach a message.
If you weren't here in that service at his precious wife's funeral, got up and preached one of the most powerful evangelistic messages ever heard in this church to a packed house. The church, brother and sister chapel, was full front to back. There were people that had known Polly's family going back to the days when some of the family had been in gospel singing groups and things. The church was packed. And Brother Lee had a captive audience, and he went to preaching like a house on fire. I have never seen anything like it. Brother Moore was sitting right beside me, and he looked over at me. His eyes were really big. He goes, "Have you ever seen anything like this in a funeral?" I mean, by somebody that was the closest person to the one they just lost. I said, "I've never seen anything like it." That says a tremendous amount about your character. That and all the other experience I've had with you through the years, Brother Stevens, I believe if your life was extended out to the time when this type of persecution would arise, I would not have the slightest doubt you would endure to the end of whatever persecution you had to face. Whether it was a physical persecution, emotional, whatever it was, I don't think there's any duress, any stress, any condition that could come against you that would cause your relationship with the Lord to be severed or made cold or whatever expression we want to use. Different personalities, though, different people with different histories and different experiences just simply have to go through different processes. It may say something about how hard it is to change certain things in us that God has to let us go through really great sorrows sometimes. That there's something in us that it's going to take that. God does know. That has been such a theme these last few weeks, even through the general meeting with Rachel Hunt's song about how God sees and knows. God knows. There's things he knows. He knows what it will take to test you. He knows it'll take to test me. As I said when I was going through my experience in the years preceding this, God also wanted me to know. See, that's really important for us to know. That when God takes us through something or allows us to go through something that's really brutal and difficult and hard, he wants us to know, I can stand. I can be faithful to God. If he takes away everything, I'm going to tell you what's one of the most beautiful things about Job's statements that he made. He made some pretty sarcastic statements to his wife and other things. He talked about how she was acting like one of the foolish women and so on. And she was telling him to curse God and die. But one of the things he said in the beginning of his persecutions, it was one of the most beautiful things. He said this during his persecution, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Yeah. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. God wants you to know that you'll still trust in him. You're not going to know that until you're put in a situation where that has been brought to its pinnacle of pressure. That's why so often when we talk about overcoming, at least in the way we believe overcoming, someone going on to complete, utter, entire, absolute perfection, it often seems to be associated with martyrdom, because when you're at the place where you're facing death, that usually is the highest level of pressure you can be dealing with, personally at least.
Job, he lost everything. Even his wife turned against him.
If my wife were to say to me, when I was in the worst suffering I was going through, the peak of my suffering, if she were to say to me, just curse God and die.
That'd be terrible.
There's only two ways you can take that, all right? You could take that as she loves you so much she can't stand to see you suffering anymore. I'd like to hope that was Job's wife's motive, all right? You could also take it like, I'm tired of hearing your whining, and this relationship has been rough anyway, so let's end this thing.
Especially when she said, curse God. That's the worst.
Well, there's where she spoke as one of the foolish women. If she had said, ask God to die, he may not have responded to her like that. She might have said, Job, I hate to see you suffering like this. Why don't you just ask God to let you fall asleep? There's sometimes people are suffering so bad that if God's not going to heal them, the best prayer we could say, Lord, let them peacefully. Yeah. If they have the hope of the resurrection, let them just peacefully go to sleep. She didn't say, ask God if he'll just let you fall asleep, Job. I don't want to see you suffer anymore. She said, curse him. That's where she spoke as one of the foolish women, because only a fool would tell somebody to curse God. But we do not see any record of divorce proceedings anywhere in the book of Job. So, who knows? They may have had a powerful relationship. Maybe it was far stronger after the end of the book of Job than it was when it started. Move on to another passage. I can't recall if we talked about this last time. That's what happens when we've got weeks between some of these Bible studies. But if so, I'll reiterate it quickly. And that's John 15, the 18th to the 25th verse, where Jesus said, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, but I've chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Now, that comes back to who you're identifying with. Remember I said, when you're doing it for Jesus' sake, you're identifying with Jesus. I'm going to be like Jesus. Not like this world. Well, because you're not like the world, you're not identifying with the world hates you. This world wants you to identify with them. You can really see that in our culture. We've gotten to the point where people want their evil to be accepted. That's a big step forward. It used to be people wanted to be able to do their evil, and they knew it wasn't accepted.
They wanted to hide it.
And very quickly, our culture has moved from most people not accepting certain things that are evil, and the people still doing them anyway, to now the majority are beginning to accept the things that are evil, and the people that are doing them are doing them. But now we're moving into a third phase, which is where we start to approach a very dangerous point for the church in terms of persecution. Every stage is dangerous when there's evil and how we respond to it, but we're approaching a stage that is a prelude to persecution when most people not only are okay with evil, but that they want you to be okay with it.
They want to legislate it.
Yeah, they want to legislate it, but they also want you to help them to promote it. If you're not actually standing up and saying, yes, I'm okay with such and such, you definitely could become an object of persecution. Even if you're just quietly taking a stand and you're not poking them in the eye, they now have gone beyond that. We're moving to the place now where they demand that you take their side. And if you won't take their side and speak positively about their lifestyle choices or other perverse practices, they're going to persecute you. And the persecution has already begun. The silencing of certain people, the canceling of people, that's already a form of persecution. The destroying of people's reputation, saying they're hateful or whatever, simply because they're standing for the truth, even if they're doing it in love, they're still called hateful. That is exactly the kind of things Jesus was talking about in Matthew 5:10-12. He was talking about them saying things falsely against you. Look, if you love somebody, I don't know how many times I've said this through the years, if you love somebody and you know that what they're doing is going to end in their destruction, the greatest thing you could do as an act of love is to tell them what they're doing is wrong and try to get them to stop, isn't it? It's like someone's on a train track. Train's coming down the tracks, but they're looking the other direction. They refuse to accept that they need to get off the tracks. There's a lot of people in this present world living on the train tracks. And I'm going to tell you, that big train of God's judgment is coming. It's coming. You may not see it yet. It may be very dark out and it hasn't come around the bend and you haven't seen the headlights, so to speak, of the train, but it is moving and it's moving at a fast clip. And they're thinking, well, I don't hear it. I don't see the light. I'm fine living on the train tracks. What fool would live on train tracks? A lot of people in this present world are living on train tracks because that great weighty instrument of God's judgment is barreling down the tracks.
I lived on it.
We've all lived on them for at least a little while of our lives, haven't we? But who would keep living on the train tracks when somebody reveals them to be what they are? Do you know you're living on train tracks and this is a live track? Trains do come through here. You may not want to pitch a tent over the train tracks and stake it down and take a nap there because this is a train track that regularly has trains passing by. But some people are doing that. If you saw a train coming and you were to shout out, which you'd have to, if they're sleeping on the train track, wake up, you would have shake them hard to try to get them up or grab them and try to pull them off the track. That's an act of love. And how else could you deliver them? But they would call that an act of hate. And that is one of the things that Jesus is talking about in these things. They're talking about how they'll speak against you falsely and so on. One of the things they speak against you falsely about is they're saying that you're evil and you're bigoted and you're hateful because you're saying what they're doing is evil. How dare you say what I'm doing is evil? Because I'm trying to save you. Because I don't want to see you injured. I don't want to see you eventually destroyed. There's no greater motivation that would be a positive motivation. He goes on to say, remember the word that I said unto you. The servant is not greater than his Lord. If they've persecuted me, they'll also persecute you. If they've kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake. There it is again. That's why they're doing it. Because you're identifying with Jesus. Because they know not him that sent me. They don't know God. Notice it's two different entities we're talking about. It's God that they don't know, and it's Jesus that they don't know. They persecuted Jesus because they did not know the God that sent him, or they didn't understand the God that sent him. The Jews thought they knew the God that sent Jesus, but they didn't understand him. They didn't realize that Jesus was his son, and they didn't give him his proper place. But a lot of the world doesn't know the God that sent Jesus or Jesus. If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not sinned. Notice what he just said. If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin. But now they have no cloak for their sin. Do you remember what I just said a few minutes ago about why we will be persecuted when what we're doing is actually an act of love? You know why Jesus came and told people what they were doing was sin? Because he wanted to deliver them from their sins. He wanted to save them. He wanted to help them. So there is a responsibility to let people know what you're doing is sin, because if you don't, then they'll still have that sin and think that they're fine. We don't want people to have a cloak for their sin. We don't want people to cover up their sin and say, it's okay, what I'm doing is fine. It's like somebody with a disease in their body that you know is there. Say you're a doctor and you're aware there's a disease, but they don't want to accept it. No, I'm fine. You're like, you're going to have surgery. You're going to die. Nope, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. But we did the x-rays, we did the biopsy, whatever it is that you did. You need surgery. Nope, I'm fine. Why would someone continue saying they're fine when somebody is telling them they're not? Because they don't want to face the surgery. They want to put their head in the sand, so to speak. That's what a lot of people are doing with their sins. But if we allow someone to continue in sin and to cloak their sin like that, we don't love them. Because if they die in their sin, we don't want them to die in their sin.
That's a strange statement he made when he said you would not have sin because they already had sin.
You have to put a word in there. It's not that we can add to the word of God. That's not what we're doing when we insert certain words. It's that sometimes they use certain expressions that you won't understand unless you add a word in our way of expressing this. What he's really saying is they would not have had awareness of their sin if I hadn't revealed it to them. They did have sin, but to them they didn't. They didn't think they had sin. That's the point. That's why you have to expand it out like an amplified Bible might do and say they would not have awareness of their sin. Because to them, they didn't think they had any sin. What I'm doing is fine. I don't have sin. But I'm showing you that you have sin. I'm telling you what the Word of God says, and that shows you actually do have sin. What did you have, Brother Chappell?
Paul was saying some of the same thing. He said, I had not known lust except by the law. Because the law explained what it was, him not knowing that's what he may have been doing, because nobody explained it. Once they explained it, there's no excuse for continuing doing it.
That's an excellent thing to add, and it's exactly the same point, because you might just think, this is okay. I have these feelings. What's wrong with them? It makes me feel good, whatever it is I'm doing. Whatever it is that I desire that isn't good for me, I like it. Thing is, you don't know it's not good for you. That's the point. You feel good experiencing it, so you think it's fine. But the law reveals to you this isn't fine, because this is what the end result will be. The law reveals that there will be judgment. That's an excellent point to bring up. The end of this says, He that hateth me hateth my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which none other man did, they had not had sin. Again, that means the same thing. If I hadn't done some of these things that revealed to them, that's exactly the word I wanted, that shone a light on them that revealed their condition, they wouldn't have had sin. in their own minds, they wouldn't have had sin. In other words, I'm fine, I'm good. And then a bright light comes that's brighter than anything you've ever seen before. I imagine all of you remember this example I gave when I first got glasses, but it's a good one to tie into this just because it's exactly how it is for sinners. When I first got glasses, I didn't know anything was wrong. I was sitting in the back of the classroom, and this was the problem, is whatever school year it was, I think it was third grade, I'd usually been sitting near the front of the class because they had people in alphabetical order, and having your name start with a B-A, just like a B-E, Robin, as you grew up as a Booker. I grew up as a Bear. I just had a little step ahead of you. A goes before E in the alphabet, but I was usually in the front of the class. But that year, I was in the back row, and my teacher was writing down equations for some math problem on the board, and I couldn't see it at all. And she's like, what's the answer? And I'm thinking, how can anybody give the answer? None of us can see what you're writing up there. You know, you think, this is exactly what this is talking about, you think this is how everybody is. So why are you expecting me to be able to see this? Nobody can see that because everybody's like me, right? You think. When I got glasses, it was so startling that all of a sudden all that became clear that I thought this is just what vision looks like. And I told the story, which is, I guess, a little bit humorous. I don't know if my parents would have appreciated the humor in it, but we were driving down the road after I got my glasses, the first time I got glasses, and down the road I could see a McDonald's way out there. And I thought, I can see the big M from the McDonald's sign. That's what everybody's been able to see all this time, that far away. And I looked, and here's my mom and dad in the front seat, and I could see all the little wrinkles and lines in their face. And I thought, that's what they look like, you know? They look older than I thought, you know. But see, that's how sin is. Until somebody puts the glasses, so to speak, of the Word of God on us, we think this is fine. You look in the mirror, I don't look so bad because you're looking at a blurry reflection. And then someone turns on the lights and gives you a better mirror, you know, it's not all smudged up or fogged up. And suddenly you see every little imperfection. You're thinking, oh my Lord, I got to do something about that, and got a big piece of hair sticking out that I didn't see before. And that's the point of these types of statements, Brother Lee. It's not that they didn't have sin, but from their perspective, they didn't have sin. They didn't think they were sinning until the Lord revealed it to them, till His Word revealed it to them. And His works as well, as he said here in this latter part. He says, now they have both seen and hated, both me and my Father. Sometimes when the Lord reveals some things to a person who doesn't want to have them revealed, they'll hate Him for it. Because we like to live with our misconceptions about ourselves. We like to think, I'm a really good person. And then the light of the Word of God reveals, you're not such a good person. And you don't want to see that. It bothers you. And you can sometimes hate the person that reveals it to you, which brings us right back to our issue of persecution. Because if somebody reveals something to you that is a flaw that's in you, that's some sin in you that you need to correct, or you're going to be in danger, you're going to be potentially either motivated by that to want to change, there's the positive, or you'll be angered and offended by it. And someone that's angered and offended by it, again, there's multiple ways that somebody could reveal it to you. Somebody could reveal it to you by preaching the Word of God to you. That's pretty direct. They could just say, I see the lifestyle you're in. This is what the Word of God says. And you've got to stop that. That's a bold and straight and direct way, and sometimes that is necessary. Somebody could also reveal it to you by simply living a life that is such a strong contrast with yours that it makes you uncomfortable. We have to do both. I heard a preacher here not long ago criticize this phrase we sometimes use. I don't know when I've used it last, but I've heard many ministers use it. Preach a sermon every day, and if necessary, use words. That's a nice phrase. It's what we might call a cliche, though sometimes that sounds like you're being negative about it, but it's just one of those catchphrase kind of things. It's true, and I certainly wouldn't criticize anybody that said it, but it's not the whole truth, because sometimes you have to use words. The gospel is not just our presentation of it in our life without speaking. It is a spoken thing. It has to be preached. It has to be taught. You do learn it best by example, and for us, the best thing we can do is be the right kind of example, really live it. Because it isn't going to do you any good to preach it if you're not living it, because no one's going to want to follow a hypocrite. You're like, this is how you need to live your life. And you look at them, you're like, but you're not living it like that. So it's like a salesman who comes to you and says, you really need to have this new product. It's the best thing you've ever seen in the world. You're like, do you use it? No, I don't use it. If you're not really living out what you're preaching, you're not going to reach anybody with what you're preaching if they see that you're not living it out. Because if you're not living it out, you must not really have faith in it. You must not really think it's that valuable. That'll cause other people to devalue it. So there is something that needs to be added to that phrase. And this minister was kind of hard on people using that phrase. I won't be hard on them because I've heard a lot of good men use that phrase. And it is true. It's just not the whole truth. We have to preach a sermon with our life. Absolutely we do. Words. But we have to use words. We have to do both. And sometimes somebody can see your life, and this is why it can't just be just your life. Somebody can see your life and think that person's in a better place than I am, but they might not understand how. They might not understand how to get there. How are they going to know all those things if words aren't used? How can they be saved except there be a preacher, except somebody preach the message to them? There's layers to that whole verse. I'm just picking out pieces of it, but how can he preach except be sent and so on? But the heart of it is you have to have someone preaching to you. And it's not just with their lifestyle. And I've seen some people even use that as their excuse why not to share the truths that God has given us to people outside of our church. They'll see it in us, and that's good enough. We don't share those secrets with them. What secrets? What secrets did Jesus hide from the lost? Oh, he told deeper things in his parables only to his disciples. Yeah, after he preached the message to the whole crowd, which means he still preached those deep things to the whole crowd. The difference is he didn't give all the interpretation to the whole crowd. But that's not the same thing. And that was for very specific targeted reasons. So we've got to be careful getting caught up in these ideas that we aren't responsible to do some of that. And sometimes people do it whether they want to consciously realize it or not for the very thing we're talking about, to escape persecution. If we speak out about what we believe on such and such, people will be against us. What is Jesus saying through all these scriptures? If you're really my disciples, not just if you're really living it, if you're preaching it, you're going to be persecuted. It's part of the package. So if we're trying to escape persecution, I'm going to use a blunt example, so forgive me. Only some of you may know what I'm talking about. That's why I feel I can use this example. But I'm sure there are those who may know what I'm talking about that could be offended by this, but you shouldn't be. We had a past minister among us back when tapes were the format that used to go out, that used to rail on the Roman Catholic Church. And almost every single time he railed on the Roman Catholic Church, he would get the tape after he had preached or taught, and he would splice it so that when you got to that point, you didn't hear him say Catholic Church or Rome or something. I guess his point was, we don't want to draw their attention. And I'm sure somebody would say, why do you want to go looking for persecution? We don't go looking for persecution, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. By that, I'm not encouraging someone to go out and start a fight. See, I said that in some of the earlier classes. If you are out looking for a fight, then you've got the wrong spirit to begin with.
That's right. You're not God's anyway.
But if you're afraid to speak the truth, if you're afraid to openly state what you believe, something is seriously wrong with your conception of the gospel and of your responsibility.
It says in Matthew 24:14, and the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. So that means the whole gospel has to be preached in all the world.
It's absolutely right. And I believe right now, Sister Cindy, we are watching that develop at a level, at least among our churches, like we've never seen among our churches before. In the last few years, in spite of all the challenges like COVID, the gospel has been going out among our churches wider and deeper and further than it has ever gone. And the witness of that happening is what we've been seeing happen in multiple churches where people are coming from other countries and things to different assemblies. That is just increasing. Certain countries that we never had a foothold in terms of any of our churches are starting to open up.
So it's the whole gospel.
It is the whole gospel, or what I sometimes refer to, and I always say you need to be careful not to think I'm talking about denomination, the full gospel. It's not missing anything, which means if somebody's saying we don't want to share some truths that we say are too precious to be shared with the world, what part of the full gospel do you want to leave out? Tell me which part. You know the bride message is part of the full gospel, right? You know that perfection is part of the full gospel. The Godhead is part of the full gospel. So I'm not sure what it is that you think is too precious to be shared with the world. So those are things that I've talked about in the past and talked about pretty straight, so I'm not going to wade into that or wander off down that rabbit trail. Sometimes there's rabbit trails like that in our Bible studies, our sermons, other things, where you see something that gets your attention and you just have to follow it. What we want when we're following a rabbit trail is to be watching and following the Spirit, that maybe the Lord wanted a little pause in the main subject, so we'd go off down that little trail a little bit because there was a point he wanted to make. He wants us to be on the main subject, but there may be a little tributary right there that takes us to something that's important to learn before we move on. So sometimes rabbit trails can be productive. All right, did we read the end of that passage? When he said that the word might be fulfilled. He said, this cometh to pass, that the word might be fulfilled that is written in their law. They hated me without a cause. Isn't that interesting? He'd say without a cause. Why would he say they hated him without a cause? They think they have a cause. Anybody know? They don't have a cause. He's trying to help them, and they hate him for trying to help them. When we're trying to reach the lost and telling them they've got to forsake what they're doing and come to the Lord, and they hate us for it, that is truly hating someone without a cause. because our motive is to help them. So how could you possibly hate somebody that's trying to help you? Well, when you don't want to be helped. That theme continues on throughout the New Testament. I'll just give you a few before we close out, but I'm going to give you a number of scriptures we'll talk about that address the issue of persecution. But one of them I think is a very important example I'm not sure I've brought up before. Maybe it's another overlapping one, forgive me. But the interesting thing about some of this overlap, sometimes we read a verse again and we go into more detail and more discussion on it than we did the first time. So that can be productive. But 2 Timothy 3:10-12 is a good one to tie into this as well. Paul says regarding himself to Timothy, he says, "Thou hast fully known my doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience." This is a pretty good resume, wouldn't you say? You've seen all this in me, Timothy. This would be a nice thing for a minister to be able to say to another minister. You've known my manner of life. That's a good thing. In other words, it's a positive. You've seen how I've lived. You've seen how I've held to my purpose. I've kept the faith, my long-suffering, charity, patience. Now we're going to wade into this subject again. Persecutions, afflictions. Isn't it interesting he includes those with that list? That list all sounds like positive things. His doctrine, that's a good thing. Doctrine sometimes makes people uncomfortable, but it's important. We want the truth. We want to believe the right things, and so doctrine is critical. Doctrine's a good thing. His manner of life, his purpose was a good thing. His faith, that's a positive thing. His long-suffering, well, long-suffering may not always be positive. Depends on if you understand the nature of what it can produce in you. Charity, which is love. Patience. Then we get into this again. Persecutions, afflictions, which came unto me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra. What persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. MacArthur, who's somebody that I have quoted heavily for a reason, I don't agree with a number of the doctrinal positions he holds, and I'm certainly not intending to promote him by quoting him, and I would seriously disagree with some of his beliefs about salvation. But he does have some beautiful insights into elements of this, some of which actually contradict his own doctrinal beliefs when he says them, which always is fascinating to me when I hear someone saying something that I think, did you hear what you just said? You literally just took apart your own doctrinal position about whatever. In his case, I've heard him take apart his own doctrinal position about the nature of salvation many times in his writings that he doesn't seem to be hearing what he's saying. He's quoting verses and saying, yes, we have to do this, we have to do that, have to do. And later he says, you don't have to do anything. Jesus did it all. Listen, I'm not trying to defame him, but I'm sure if he was sitting here, he wouldn't appreciate how I'm characterizing his comments, but just read his different statements and you'll see. He has some very good insights on some of this, and he's one who, his studies on the Sermon on the Mount, he has some very good points and insights. You just have to consider anytime you're quoting somebody that may have a different doctrinal position on some key issues than you do, be aware of that. Be aware of that even when you're reading things that sound really good, because you need to be careful because there could be some influence in it that would make you think incorrectly about something. And so when I do quote some of these individuals, if I am quoting something that needs to be qualified, like this is how we see this, I'll make sure to say that. But let me give you one of his quotes before we get ready to close out here that I think is a good quote on this particular issue, and we'll move on further into some scriptures the next time. He says, all of the other Beatitudes have to do with inner qualities. This sounds like Sister Cindy quoting. We could have just quoted her, couldn't we? All the other Beatitudes have to do with inner qualities, attitudes, and spiritual character. The 8th Beatitude speaks of external things that happen to believers, but the teaching behind these results also has to do with attitude. The believer who has the qualities required in the previous Beatitudes will also have the quality of willingness to face persecution for the sake of righteousness. I'm going to pause for a minute in his quote. All you have to do is think about the example I keep bringing up that goes right along with persecution, hungering and thirsting after righteousness that'll bring persecution on you. If you are really hungering and thirsting after righteousness, you'll face persecution for its sake, won't you? Whether it's knowing that if I can endure this, it will make me more righteous, it'll develop more righteousness in me, or whether it's the fact that I'm enduring it because I'm going to hold on to righteousness. I'm not going to let this world steal that standard of righteousness and holiness that I am determined to hold on to. He goes on to say, he will have the attitude of self-sacrifice for the sake of Christ. It is the lack of fear and shame in the presence of courage and boldness that says, I will be in this world what Christ would have me be. I will say in this world what Christ will have me say. Whatever it costs, I will be and say those things. He goes on to say, the Greek verb is a passive perfect participle and could be translated, allow themselves to be persecuted. Isn't that interesting? I'm butting into his quote for a second. Isn't that interesting, though? That the form of the Greek that's being used here could have been translated, blessed are those who allow themselves to be persecuted. Because you don't have to allow yourself to be persecuted. There's a couple responses you could have to persecution. One of them could be, you persecute me, I'm going to retaliate. You're not going to persecute me, I'm going to reciprocate. Most often, we don't respond with equal reciprocity, like, you poked me, I poke you back. No, you poked me, so I punch you in the face. We want to take it up a notch, you know. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you worse. Well, you don't even need to hurt them at all. But often we don't just respond just by equal reciprocity, which isn't necessarily appropriate. We go a step further. But this is interesting that this Greek word can mean to allow to be persecuted. Because number one, you could fight back. You could resist that persecution in a very aggressive way.
What Peter did.
It is what Peter did.
Jesus was the one who was going to allow persecution.
That's exactly right. Jesus was allowing himself to be persecuted, and Peter stepped in with a sword and lopped off somebody's ear. And I heard somebody here say lately, and they're probably right, it's a good thing Peter wasn't very good with the sword.
Yeah,
Because probably what he was trying to do was lop off their head.
that's right.
But he took off an ear, which either way, it would have been easy for Jesus to resolve, but it would have been much more dramatic if he'd had to put a head back on than he had to put an ear back on. He was trying to do some damage, there's no doubt about that.
And you can see that contrast, exactly what MacArthur's saying. Jesus was allowing himself to go with those people. No man took him by force, and he proved that when they all fell backwards. He went willingly. He was a lamb that was a willing sacrifice. But Peter, he was ready to fight.
Yep. We have to be willing to allow ourselves sometimes to be misused. And the ways that Jesus talked about in Matthew 5, 10, and 12 are principally verbal things, people saying things to you or about you, but in any way. Now, again, there are layers of this. I'm not going to go into this tonight. If you have questions about it, we can do it next time. I'm going to finish his quote in a moment. But there's layers to this because allowing yourself to be persecuted isn't necessarily synonymous with allowing other people to be persecuted. I've said that about turning the other cheek. You can turn the other cheek, but you can't force someone else to turn the other cheek. You can't say, there's somebody getting brutally beat up, and I'm just going to stand there because they need to turn the other cheek and just take their beating. No, there's nothing biblical about that. We protect the weak. We watch out for people. But when it comes to people misusing you, you have to be willing to take it is what it comes down to. He goes on to say about this particular Greek word, by the way, the perfect form indicates continuousness. In this case, a continuous willingness to endure persecution if it is the price of godly living. Now, I'm not done with this quote, but I'm going to point out how important that is. If we really are determined to live for the Lord, we will allow people to persecute us. I started saying a moment ago, I guess I didn't finish. You could not allow somebody by fighting back in some aggressive way. Somebody tries to persecute you and you knock them off their feet. Somebody says something mean to you, you say something worse. Somebody gossips about you, you totally destroy their reputation with people. You could respond that way. The other way that you could not allow yourself to be persecuted is by compromising if what you're being persecuted about is the right thing. In other words, I'm standing for the Lord and they're persecuting me. I don't really want to be persecuted, so I'm going to compromise. I'm going to let down my standard. I'm not going to stand for the Lord because I'm tired of being persecuted. So you could not allow yourself to be persecuted by aggressively fighting back, or you could not allow yourself to be persecuted by compromising, letting down your standard, adulterating your relationship with the Lord. Either way is wrong. Let's say somebody is persecuting you because they know you are against the type of lifestyle they're living in that is immoral. They know that's your position. Maybe you haven't made a bunch of big statements about it, but they know you're a biblical Christian, which there is no other. You can call yourself a Christian all you want, but if the Bible isn't the basis of your faith, you're not a Christian. That word is a word that can only have meaning if it's biblically defined. So you're a biblical Christian, so you have certain stands that you take on immoral choices someone could make. And they know that's your position because they know that you believe the Bible. And so they're persecuting you. And you say, you know what, I'm going to change my stand on that. I'm going to compromise my morals. I'm going to compromise my teaching so I won't get persecuted. I'm not talking about somebody swinging a baseball bat at you and you stand there and smile and say, swing away. Get out of there.
If they were persecuting you, just turn and walk away and leave them.
Yeah, you don't have to stand there and be persecuted.
You don't have to stand there and take it.
But there are some situations in which you're not going to be able to escape without either compromising your position or without retaliating and knocking them down to get away from the situation. That's what I'm referring to. Not so much escaping physical persecution as pressures that come against us that might cause us to compromise our integrity. They're going to talk bad about me because I have this biblical view. This is what the Bible teaches. I'm going to stand on the Bible, and you're getting persecuted. You can't compromise. You have to stand on the Bible. To finish his quote, but he goes on to say, this beatitude speaks of a constant attitude of accepting whatever faithfulness to Christ may bring. It is in the demands of this beatitude that many Christians break down in their obedience to the Lord, because here is where the genuineness of their response to the other beatitudes is most strongly tested. I'm breaking it again. Are you going to have that kind of spirit? Are you going to be able to stay meek when somebody is persecuting you, saying bad things about you, attacking your integrity maybe disrespecting you? Are you going to be able to stay meek? This is where it's tested. And that's why what's so interesting about this, what I said in the beginning and what I said in our last class about what sets us apart, this is the testing agent to see how well these other qualities have developed. That's why I think it's the last. And that's why it's doubly blessed. Because if you can endure persecution and do it in the right spirit, holding your character and integrity, maintaining your relationship with the Lord, your love for Him, all those things we talked about, and you can endure persecution, especially wrongful persecution, which is what this is about. I don't deserve this persecution. They're saying lies about me, or they're treating me in a way that I don't deserve to be treated. And you can still maintain those other qualities that preceded this. That's the test of how well they've developed in you, you see. So the greater the persecution you undergo, and those qualities are still strong in your life, the more you're proving that those qualities have been developed. And I know God is more than wise enough to do that incrementally, meaning He knows where your level of spiritual maturity is at. He's not going to bring a level of persecution that He knows you're not strong enough to handle yet that'll totally destroy you. That goes back to the statement that He made about He'll always leave a way of escape, because He's not going to bring such a great load on you that it'll crush you and you couldn't possibly stand under it. You may not think that because it feels like it's destroying you, but God isn't going to bring something upon you that'll destroy you because you're not strong enough to handle it. He'll bring things against you you might think are going to destroy you. You might be sure, I can't make it through this. I can't survive this. This is too big for me. But God knows. He knows you can, especially if I'm giving you the strength and the power. And then you get a little stronger, get a little stronger. Strength added to strength, you know. You get a little stronger. And as you get stronger, more can be applied until you just keep getting stronger. Until you finally get to a point where no measure of persecution can break your resolve. No measure of pressure is going to cause you to break your relationship with the Lord. And all those preceding qualities, and I'll maybe finally finish MacArthur's quote, but all those preceding qualities will have been tested to their limit. The greatest pressure I could possibly bring against somebody to cause them to lose their meekness, and they didn't lose it. I'm not there yet in all those areas. I don't know that any of us are, but I'll speak for myself. I know I'm not there yet. There's been times that my meekness was tested. I thought, I think I can remain meek, even when some pretty wrong things are going on, you know, in terms of people's words and attitudes. And then something hits you that you weren't expecting to get hit with. And you realize, and we all need to realize this, wise, well, I wasn't quite as strong as I thought I was, because I'm almost buckling under that. I'm ready to say something, you know. My wife is probably the only one that knows whenever that happens. There's been a couple times I've told her, she's so sweet about it, but I've told her, oh, I'm so close to saying something. I am so close to saying something. I don't know what's keeping me from saying it. I knew what was keeping me from saying it. It was the Lord, but I thought, this person needs to hear it. They need to hear how ridiculous they're acting. I'm not talking about a saint in the church, by the way. I'm talking about something at a higher level than members of the regular membership of the church. This person needs to hear how ridiculous they're acting. They need to hear it. They can't keep treating people this way, whatever it might be. And it wasn't time for that to be, and my spirit wasn't right to say it. And thank God when I was tested to that level and I realized I'm not yet where I need to be in this area. I need to be a little stronger to where no matter what they would do or say, I just would peaceably be able to take it. But that's why God takes us through those things. That's why those type of tests don't end. And you think, well, I learned this lesson already, Lord. I've had people disrespect me, so you don't have to do that anymore. You could get it worse, so just wait and see. You'll get tested in all points, just like he was. So, all right, coming back to MacArthur's quote here, he says, it is here where we are most tempted to compromise the righteousness we have hungered and thirsted for. It is here where we find it convenient to lower God's standards to accommodate the world and thereby avoid conflicts and problems that we know obedience will bring. But God does not want his gospel altered under pretense of its being less demanding, less righteous, or less truthful than it is. He does not want witnesses who lead the unsaved into thinking that Christ's life cost nothing. A synthetic gospel, a man-made seed, produces no fruit. And we want to produce fruit, don't we? We want the fruit of these Beatitudes to grow in our life until they've grown to their fullness. And one of the Beatitudes that will help them and aid them to do that is that persecution. As much as we may not desire that, it is part of the process. And when we realize the value of going through it, and we realize who else has gone through it, like Jesus said, they persecuted the prophets afore you. Mighty and great men and women of God have been persecuted. So you're in good company if you're being persecuted, at least, and I'm going to end with this, if you're being persecuted for righteousness' sake and for Jesus' sake. If you're being persecuted for the right reasons.